Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about identifying and understanding cruelty and neglect. And this class is going to cover kind of the definition of cruelty and neglect, how to identify it, whether you are working in the shelter, in the field, out in community engagement, wherever your position may be. We really want to try and help everyone understand when I'm seeing something, how do I figure out, is this a cruelty thing? Is it neglect, or is this something else entirely? Is this a lack of resources where we could help somebody with? So I'm super excited to be here. And that pup on the screen you may have just seen, that's actually my dog. And I use him whenever I'm talking about cruelty and neglect because when you see his picture, obviously you probably had an immediate reaction to that doesn't really look right, and something's wrong with that dog, something should be done. And he had cancer, so there was something wrong with him, but he was getting vet care and he was getting all of the medications and stuff that he needed. And I think using him is a really good case in point that part of what we're going to talk about today is that sometimes when we see something or we experience something, we have an immediate reaction. And one of the best skills that we can master is understanding that reaction, figuring out where it came from, and then using our questioning and fact finding to figure out what is really at the roots, the bone, the foundation of what's going on in a home with an animal, with a family, so on and so forth. So thanks for joining us. Thank you to Maddie's. I love the opportunity anytime to talk about animal welfare. And so you know who I am. My name is Jace Huggins. I am the Vice President and Chief of Humane Law Enforcement at San Diego Humane Society here in California. I am also a nationally elected board member for the National Animal Care and Control Association. I'm a training member for the Cal Animals Association. That's our California State Association. And I also, on occasion, in my free time, teach for Humane World for Animals Law Enforcement Training Center, and working for Maddie's here and there and getting to do a lot of fun training with them. Super excited to be here. There is one more really important thing for you to know about me, aside from the fact that I've been in animal law enforcement for about 15 years now. The most important thing to know about me is I one time made one of those baskets and won a 7-foot tall bat nana and had to figure out how to fly it home on a plane. So that's the most important thing to know. So whenever I teach, it's really important to me that I can share with you real life stories. I don't want to go to stock photos and fill up your feed here with a bunch of things that I don't really know much about. So there are going to be some graphic photos, either from cases I've worked or worked with other teams or with my teammates at either of the shelters I've worked with. Another thing to know, I'm not a lawyer. I've been in animal law enforcement for about 3 years, but I am a humane law officer in chief. Not a lawyer, so don't take any of this as any type of legal advice. And the third thing, always follow your department's policies. You may hear something that I say that is completely legal appropriate at my shelter or in my state, but it might not be for yours. So always check in with your department and make sure that any pathway you plan to take does follow your own department policies. So let's jump in. We're going to talk about what our goals are for today's session. Primarily, we want you to learn to quickly identify possible neglect or cruelty for a multitude of reasons. One, we want you to be prepared to know what to ask, how to follow up on any situation you might be in, but also so that you can alert the appropriate authorities if needed. We want you to learn how to capture any needed information. Obviously, especially if you're in the shelter setting, you haven't gone through any of the training that officers might go through to learn how to identify who people are and learn about what information might be needed for animal control officers. We're going to discuss approaches to gaining information and then understanding the importance of documenting everything. You will probably hear me say this many times, but if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. When it comes to anything that might end up being a case down the line, if we don't have it somewhere in writing, it can be very, very hard to keep things going. We'll interview people and all of that, but when we're giving people instructions and stuff, we pretty much have to have that written down somewhere. And then get a general understanding of the process once your part is done. So if you have reported something to an ACO or to local law enforcement, if that's who you work with, I want you to understand what the steps are that are happening after that point. We are going to talk about laws real quick. Every state, all 50 states have some type of cruelty animal fighting statute. Everyone has some version of laws. Some of them have laws that are really severely punished. They're higher felonies. They might come with loss of animal ownership. Some of them maybe have primarily misdemeanors or one or two felonies. Maybe there's the ownership portion is a little bit different, but all 50 states have some type of animal cruelty law. And then there's also lots of federal laws. Unlikely you'll do very much with them unless perchance you are involved in like a large blood sports, cockfighting, dogfighting type of case, then you might be exposed to more of the federal laws. And that's primarily going to be your Dogfighting Prohibition Act, your Animal Welfare Act. But generally, you're going to have federal agents or wardens, state wardens that are going to be doing that type of enforcement. So we've got a lot to talk about in the next hour. So hold on, hold tight, and I'm excited to be able to share this information with you. We're going to start with what is animal cruelty. And I want to start here because it's important to me that we kind of build a foundation of understanding. Just like I shared when I had the picture of my dog Toby up on the first screen, we all land somewhere on a spectrum when it comes to animal welfare. We're all in animal welfare. You know, I'm hopeful we're all in animal welfare because we want to help people. We want to help our community and the animals that they raise. We want to take care of animals and improve their lives. But when it comes to understanding or having that innate part here that's in our hearts of what is cruel, there's a spectrum and we all fall in a little bit of different places. And so using definitions and words to help us have a shared language and understanding about what animal cruelty really is important. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to go through a couple of definitions here and give you a second to think about with each one what it is you maybe like or don't like. And then I'll discuss with you kind of my interpretation of them. So the first one is a definition that Acion used in 1999. If you like to read a lot of journal articles and medical articles, he did a lot of research on animal cruelty back in the late 90s in relation to interpersonal violence and animal cruelty. So the definition he had was that animal cruelty was socially unacceptable behavior that intentionally causes unnecessary pain, suffering, or distress to and or the death of an animal. So read that over again for me real quick and then think about that and think about what you may like or not like with that definition. So for me, with Asion's definition, one of the struggles that I have with this particular definition is that it requires intention. So it says behavior that intentionally causes unnecessary pain. And animal cruelty and animal neglect can come into play without intent. Lacking to do something, refusing to do something, not doing something can also cause suffering and pain. So the requirement of there being intention doesn't sit well with me. Also, socially unacceptable is really ambiguous. What's socially unacceptable to you may not be socially unacceptable to me, and vice versa. So that subjective nature of this definition makes it hard for me to kind of like hold tightly as a good definition. So we'll go to the right, Feldhaus and Kellert. They said substantial cruelty to animals as a behavior pattern that deliberately, repeatedly, and unnecessarily causes hurt to vertebrate animals in such a way that it's likely to cause them serious injury. So go ahead and read over that one. Think on that for a minute. I said a minute. I didn't really mean a minute. A couple of seconds. So substantial cruelty to animals as a behavior pattern. So the requirement of it being a pattern is not something that I necessarily agree with. I don't think that animal cruelty has to be a pattern of behaviors. There can be one instance, and that one instance can qualify as either animal cruelty or neglect. So I don't think we need to see repeated behavior in order to determine that cruelty or neglect is being caused. The other thing is that this says specifically it's about vertebrate animals, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. Brown, down in the lower left-hand corner here, Brown says unnecessary suffering knowingly inflicted on a sentient being, animal, or human. So think about that one. And so for this one, again, we have this whole, it kind of ties back to intentional or knowingly. It seems to me with this definition that the person has to have some mindset or thought process or mens rea, if you will, planning or knowingly inflicting that cruelty. And I don't think that that's really a requirement. So we'll go to the one on the right here, cruelty to animals. So this is the current definition in the People's Law Dictionary. It's the crime of inflicting physical pain, suffering, or death on an animal, usually a tame one, beyond necessity for normal discipline. It can include neglect that is so monstrous, withholding food or water, that the animal has suffered, died, or been put in imminent danger of death. So think on this one for just a second. Okay, so with this one of the things that really jumps out to me and that I struggle with is that it says usually a tame one, because animal cruelty can occur to all animals. You can be cruel to wild animals. You can be cruel to feral cats, if you will. You know, an animal does not have to be tame in order to be considered eligible, if you will, to be a victim of animal cruelty. So in my life, I do not typically tell people to go to Wikipedia to get information, but in my unending search for the best way to kind of help succinctly define what animal cruelty is, Wikipedia is actually the one that I have found that I like the most. And so what they say is cruelty to animals, also known as animal abuse, animal neglect, or animal cruelty, is the infliction or suffering of harm by humans upon non-human animals, either by omission or commission. And that omission or commission, I think, is what best encapsulates what we're looking at when we're trying to figure out what is animal cruelty and what is neglect. Either you did something that caused harm and suffering, or you didn't do something and it caused harm and suffering. So either by omission or commission. So that's where I kind of land. You know, feel free to look around and see what you can find for yourself if you find one that you feel like fits better. But omission or commission is going to be kind of the core bottom line for us as we're working through this course. So we talked about the different types of animals. I mentioned the vertebrate. One of those definitions said vertebrate animals. So as a scenario, if someone were to call into your shelter or come into your shelter and say, my nephew keeps stepping on spiders in the house, you need to come do something. Generally, I would think that most of our departments across the US would probably say, well, that's not a crime. You know, spiders are pests. You know, maybe again, the spectrum. Some of you may be like, that's horrible. I take all the spiders in my house outside. And some of you may be like, that happens sometimes. But we would not consider that to be a crime against an animal. However, if someone were to come in and they were to share that their nephew were pulling the legs off of spiders and then leaving them in a jar to die, while we're looking at the same animal, the acts that that person is taking are different. So this is a situation in where someone is intentionally and maliciously acting in a cruel manner towards an animal. So whether that be a house spider or whether that be someone's pet tarantula, because we can have the same type of animal, but when we're looking at the small animals, the reptiles, the arachnids, and that, we may have some that would normally live outside and some that people keep as pets. Being kept as a pet is not a mandate or a requirement for animal cruelty to occur. So either the pet tarantula or a spider that's picked up outside and then cruelly left to die with intent would be of a higher concern. Staying on the pest topic, rats and mice. We legally are allowed to kill rats and mice in our homes on a regular basis. Now, there have been many cases that have actually gone to prosecution where people have taken wild rats or mice. They have unduly and unjustly tortured them, as you can see in this picture, and that is animal cruelty. When we are talking about rats and mice and other types of animals, there are times where things may be done that would be considered, you know, maybe if done in someone's home to be something that were justifiably fall under an animal cruelty or neglect statute. But because of where it's done or how it's done, it might not be. So research laboratories are generally in almost all of the states exempt from the animal cruelty laws and statutes. Most of your ACOs, dog wardens in your states, do not have the authority to go in and investigate a research laboratory. They have their own oversight and permitting and inspections and all of that. But again, what I really want to highlight here is that all of us fall in a different place on what is right and what is wrong. And then we have our laws that we have to follow, which is what we're going to get into next. And by working together, having shared language and shared understanding, we are much better able to create consistency across the board within our community so that our citizens understand what to expect. Our citizens know what the rules are. Because if we see something and have a very strong reaction and kind of get tunnel vision and focus highly on that issue being wrong, illegal. We can alienate people. We can actually falsely accuse them of things, which does happen. We're actually going to look at a couple of videos later on, and that can be concerning. So we want to have a shared understanding, a shared baseline general understanding, which I can't create for your department. I can share this information with you, but I recommend in one of the team meetings, sit down and work together and really talk about where is the line for you all as a department. Work with your ACOs. What is it? What's the tipping point where we have to come to you? What's the tipping point where it's absolutely fine for us to work with someone, so on and so forth. And we'll talk about resources and access to care here in just a couple minutes also. So animal cruelty as a crime, we use one term, animal cruelty. However, there are two different types, if you will, of cruelty that fall under that big title. And that's generally neglect, and then malicious torture. So most states have the term animal cruelty, and it's about if you injure an animal, kill an animal without lawful justification, torment an animal, if you abandon, fail to provide necessary sustenance while the animal is under your control. Most of them have felony levels, like I said, not all of them, but most of the states do have some type of felony level punishment for animal cruelty, and generally that's for your malicious cruelty. So in today's world, I can't talk about animal cruelty, and I especially can't talk about neglect without talking about access to care. Access to care is becoming a nationwide crisis for our pet owners, and it is on us as civil servants, if you're municipal, the nonprofits that are out there trying to help owners to really assess what the difference is for this owner between can't and won't. And I talk about this concept a lot, but there is a major difference when someone can't do something and when someone won't do something. And we need to work through figuring out where we're at with someone before we decide to start involving legal action against them. So access to care in a nutshell, our world is getting more expensive. I'm sure all of you are feeling it in your day-to-day life. Veterinary care is getting exceptionally more expensive. Getting veterinary appointments can be very difficult. It takes people sometimes weeks. And, I'm going to use California as an example. Our legal process in California is that we give someone a 48-hour notice to go get veterinary care. I don't know a veterinary hospital in my community right now that could get you into an appointment within 48 hours. It is almost impossible. So our legal process is actually creating a mandate that people have to go receive emergency veterinary care, in which the prices for emergency veterinary visits are even crazier than your general practice veterinary costs. So that's something we have to be mindful of as we are navigating these situations and these cases with people. Just like people are struggling to take care of themselves, their healthcare, they are struggling to take care of their animals. Many times, cases that are primarily neglect cases, and especially what we consider to be a passive neglect case, meaning there was no intent to not feed or not care for the animal. There was just an inability to, and it's something that happens over time. They are generally rooted out of inability to access resources versus a desire for an animal to suffer or a willfulness or intent for the animal to suffer. And we need to really think when we are looking to take criminal action on someone, is this the right pathway? Is a punitive measure really going to create any type of betterment? If we seize an animal and take it to a shelter that is already at 115 to 120% capacity and put it in a cage, and we write up a misdemeanor against someone that affects their future job prospects or their ability to pay other bills because now they have court fees they have to pay for. There are long-term consequences to every action we take. And, I also want to be clear, I am not against taking legal action when the situation is correct, but I do think we are at a time and place right now where we really have to think about what is right for the animal, what is right for the person, what is right for the community, what is right for a shelter, and how do we best support our community while also making sure the animals are being taken care of. So I'm going to share a little story here. This is a video. This is out of Michigan. It's been a case that I've been following for the last year. I find it interesting. I think it may even be somewhat precedent setting. So let's go ahead and listen to the news from last year, and then I'll give you the case update.
This all started in early November when a veterinarian from the Frankenmuth area was in Grand Rapids for a conference. She says she stopped at this Bigby on Eastern near 28th to grab a cup of coffee and spotted a pit bull mix tied up to a truck behind the business next door.
There's no food, no water, no shelter, nobody's nearby.
It was a warmer than average early November day with a high of 59, but Dr. Amanda Hergenreiter still thought the dog looked cold and perhaps abandoned. Her colleague checked with workers at a nearby Bigby.
They did say there's a homeless man, that they think that's the homeless man's dog.
But Hergenreiter said over a half hour's time, no one showed up. And when she asked Grand Rapids police if she could take the dog.
You could personally, I can't give you any advice or anything like that, but, just do what you got to do.
So the veterinarian took him back to the east side of the state and named him Bigby. This was when he first arrived at the vet's office. This was weeks later, after Hergenreiter said she had repaired a severe urinary tract infection and a rotten tooth. But Grand Rapids police ultimately ordered Hergenreiter to return Bigby because he is also named Vinny, and he belongs to Chris Hamilton, who had reported Vinny stolen.
I just want my dog back. That's all I want.
These are pictures from Vinny's life with Hamilton in Grand Rapids. The 57-year-old said though he is currently homeless, he and Vinny always find a safe place to sleep. In Hamilton's car, on couches of friends and family. We found Hamilton in a hotel.
I had my dog 15 years, never neglected him. And, we loved each other. I felt like the lost part of my body after that. Never felt the same after losing them. And
Hamilton said he had left Vinny that day to walk to a nearby gas station. And when he returned, he thought at first that Vinny, who is at least 16 years old, had broken loose. Animal control reports show officers have responded to concerns about Vinny before and always determined there was no neglect, no abuse.
the point is she came on private property and stole my dog.
He says you stole his dog, period. What do you say?
I say, if you can't provide basic rights to a dog, there's no stealing. That was a rescue.
Hergenreiter said animal control has declined to investigate the dog's living conditions further, so she's not returning him.
So I think this case is well-timed in kind of the current climate that we're in this concept of, how do we best care for animals? All of our states, for the most part, are experiencing higher levels of unhoused individuals. I know my past city and where I work now, we do major programs to support pet ownership for unhoused individuals and helping them get them vaccinated and cared for. And it sounds like this owner and dog were known to the local shelter and animal control officers. But you heard that veterinarian, and her quote there is what I wanted to get to. She said that wasn't stealing, that was an animal rescue, because you can't provide basic rights to an animal. And I think this again brings us back to that spectrum of where we all fall. What are our reactions, but what are also our legal responsibilities? So interestingly enough, this case went to jury trial just last week, not for animal cruelty, but for larceny, for theft of Vinny. And that veterinarian was actually found guilty of stealing Vinny from him. And I think that is a big precedent-setting win for the concept that owners should have the right to have their animals and work with their shelters, with their ACOs to fix things, that you don't get to just take an animal because you don't feel that it's being treated well or treated correctly. And I'm sure all of us that work in this realm have experienced this in some way or another, whether it be neighbors or maybe groups that have strong feelings about how certain animals are living. Vinny unfortunately was euthanized prior to being able to be returned to his owner, which I think is really sad. I think that the department that had been working with him should have had the right to continue working with him. That's just my take on it. But I do think this is precedent setting. And I think it's a reminder that, again, we all fall in a certain place on this spectrum of, you know, what's bad and what's really bad and what's not so bad. But there's also still laws to follow, and we have to work within those laws, and we have to follow those laws and understand those laws. So with that, that's going to lead us right into a couple of snippets. We're not going to go over all 50 states, don't worry, but just a couple of snippets of laws. And most of our states do have laws that actually have different little sections for neglect versus malicious cruelty. So they are really two separate things. We just, like I said, kind of lump them under one umbrella. So here's California. You're going to see a person who overdrives, overloads, drives, overloaded, overworks, tortures, torments, deprives of necessary sustenance. That's our general neglect law here in California. Interestingly, as you look through other states, so the middle one here is Massachusetts. Overdrives, overloads, drives when overloaded, overworks, tortures, torments, deprives. And then looking over at Nevada, overdrive, overload, torture, cruelly beat, unjustifiably injure. You will see a lot of very similar wording. These neglect laws, many of them are based off of some of the original laws, animal cruelty laws that came into play, I believe in New York City in 1870s, somewhere around there, 60s, 70s. And they use that same terminology, overdrive, overload, really focusing on the horses, the donkeys and whatnot that were used to pull carts and get things everywhere at the time. So a lot of our neglect laws share some very common terminology. Now, the overt cruelty, or what you might consider like the malicious cruelty laws, generally, so here in California, that's our section A. Maliciously, intentionally maims, mutilates, tortures, wounds a living animal. You'll see for Massachusetts, malicious killing or injury, willfully maliciously kills. And then here in Nevada, torture or unjustifiably maim, mutilate, or kill. So these are our laws that cover intentionality, that forethought, that doing something that was so beyond what a reasonable, socially conscious type of person would do, that it justifies being a crime. So cases like this are going to be, I'll give you a couple of examples that cases I have worked or my team has worked. Family members get in a fight, one of the family members gets mad and threw the family turtle off a balcony. That was an A, that was intentional, that was malicious. There was no neglect there. When we're talking about neglect, we're going to think about a case that's more like a really skinny dog, or a dog that has so many fleas and ticks and skin and infection that clearly needed some type of veterinary intervention, or even over-the-counter intervention, depending, but the owner just would not do that. And again, difference between can't and won't, and we've always got to think about that. So these are some examples of cruelty laws. Again, going back to that Wikipedia definition, omission, that's going to be your neglect. You did not do something and it caused an animal to suffer, or by commission, you did something that caused an animal to suffer. So on that topic, we all know what life in the shelter, life in the field is like. I don't know anyone who works in our industry right now that is sitting back, relaxed. We're very busy across the US. We have lots of animals coming in. We're getting lots of animals adopted out. We're doing community outreach. We're doing, pet store and pet place type adoptions. We're doing call centers and resource provision, and some of us are doing behavior and all of that. So it's not like we have a ton of extra free time. And so I want to acknowledge that in the beginning, because I am going to ask you, especially if you're working in the shelter side, that there may be some steps that you can take to help your ACOs get a head start on a potential case. So knowing that you are so busy and that you can't possibly wrap all of the chocolates that are coming down the conveyor belt, we are going to talk about some quick things that we can do during our first contacts with people. We'll do in the shelter, and I'll kind of touch on if you happen to be in the field. It's going to be very similar. a lot of this is going to be based on communication and being able to talk to people and knowing what to ask. The first thing I always talk about is when someone walks in the door, we have to check our bias. We all have unconscious bias, and we're not going to dig into it right now, but I recommend you go look into it. But unconscious bias or implicit bias is basically feelings and beliefs that we are unaware of. They are formed by our history, our journey that we've lived in our life, from things we've learned from our parents, our grandparents, other family members, close friends, our tribe, if you will, whether they're blood or chosen or by blood. And so when we have these unconscious beliefs, we may not realize it, but they show up for us in times, and especially in times of like stress or when that particular bias might be being triggered. And it's really important that we are super mindful about the potential of unconscious bias driving us. So I'm going to give you a quick example of how unconscious bias can form in your mind. This is me. I am Googling and recording here. I asked Google just to tell me, what does rich look like? I wanted to know what the interwebs, the most used internet search bar tells us what rich looks like. And I want you to look at the difference of those pictures, because the second box is I asked Google to tell me what poor looks like. And we all use the computer day in and day out, and we are given information from the computer. And our brain tallies that, because our brain is really a huge, masterful filing cabinet that ticks things away so that we don't have to think about them later on. And so with subtle unconscious type of persuasion, like what Google just showed us here, our brain can file away what its belief is of what someone who is poor might look like versus what someone who is rich might look like. The second thing we have to be really mindful of is cynicism. Cynicism is the belief that people are selfish and dishonest. It can manifest itself as frustration, disillusionment, distrust. Oftentimes cynics expect the worst, and it's the antithesis of idealism, truth, justice, virtues that law enforcement officers swear to, and virtues that most of us who went into sheltering came in to uphold. I want to do better. I want to do better for my community. I want to do better for the animals in my community. I want to be the voice for the voiceless is one of the things that I hear a lot of. So we come into this field with all of this idealism and hope to do better. And when we find out that we've been lied to or something has happened that makes us distrust, it can grow cynicism within us. And one of the big things to be aware of is that certain types of unconscious bias, like confirmation bias and cynicism, can really go hand in hand, and they can feed off of each other and create kind of a negativity cycle that can lead you down the path of, as you're, so say, sitting in the front of the shelter and someone walks in with a skinny dog, before they even open their mouth, you're thinking, oh, you're going to lie to me and tell me that's not your dog. That's cynicism in action. Here's some other examples of cynicism in our profession. She just found this 15-year-old dog with multiple tumors last night. Wow, he sure seems to know you for just finding him in the road an hour ago. Oh, so you've called every vet in town and no one has any appointments available. How odd, not even the walk-in emergency clinic. Oh, you just got this skinny dog 2 days ago. Please tell me more. And hey, I'm going to go out to that bite that's probably not even a bite. That lady was so over the top. It's probably a freckle or something on her arm. Some of you may have just chuckled a little bit, and that's okay. I live in reality. I know what this work is like. I've been in sheltering for a long time. But I do think it's important to note that if you have heard yourself say stuff like this, if you have heard your colleagues say stuff like this, it's good to have a sit down and talk about what are some ways that you can work as a team to battle cynicism, because you can work your way out of kind of that cynicism spiral with some good honest talk and some support from colleagues that are like, hey, that sounded a little bit rough. Like, want to talk about it? Let's chat. Not what this class is about, but I wanted to note it because I do think it is something that's really important to think about and listen to. Now, I just went on with you about be careful about unconscious bias, be careful about cynicism. That does not mean I don't want you to listen to your gut. If your gut is giving you your spidey senses, document, get the information you need. What I don't want you to do is jump to a conclusion. It is okay to believe that you might have a feeling that something is off. Don't jump to the conclusion and immediately get in your mind that this person is guilty of something. Because what happens is you change your demeanor and your behavior. When you change your demeanor and your behavior, they're going to change theirs. So check your bias, check your cynicism, listen to your gut though, and work through the fact finding that we're going to go through right now. So this was a situation with a really skinny dog. I'll show you the dog's picture next. And when the CSR at the time came to me, she said, hey, I've got this intake that I'm doing, and his story just didn't match up for me. He told me that the dog walked into his yard, but when he went to go get the dog, he just picked it up and carried it in. He didn't let it walk at all. And that seemed weird to me because he said it walked into his yard. Why wouldn't you think it would walk into the shelter? And then she said the way he held the dog was really, really familiar. And then when he put the dog on the cart, because the dog wasn't able to walk very well, when he put the dog in the cart, he left his hand on the dog for a little bit longer than what you would expect. So those were the things that she shared with me, and I was like, okay, like let's see what's going on. He had already left at that time. This was the dog that he had brought in. And in the end, with this particular one, the animal care staff did go out and start intaking the dog and found a microchip. And in that particular case, it did go back to him. What I will tell you is that we got his address off the microchip and went out and chatted with him, and he was terrified. He was terrified that if he told us that this was his dog, that he was going to get in trouble. And so he said, I was in this place of, I knew my dog needed help. I can't afford to go to a veterinary hospital, but I'm so scared of what will happen to me and that you're going to get me in trouble. I just got a job. I just didn't know what to do. And yeah, I lied and I shouldn't have. And what do I need to do next? He very quickly, fell on the sword. We allowed him to do an owner surrender. And his dog was euthanized. She was actually quite old. But we hear that a lot from people, and we're going to talk about building trust in just a little bit. So when you are gathering information, we're really going to focus on the who, what, when, where, why. We're busy. We're trying to manage the conveyor belt, of chocolates, if you will, all day long, figuring out what's coming in, who's being adopted, who needs the next set of vaccines, who's going to medical, what field calls do we need to get done. But there's some basic information that we should be gathering at almost every contact. One of them is some type of identifying number. When it comes to any further action down the road, we need to have some type of identifying number, because names are great, but there's a lot of people in this world that share the same names. So having a driver's license number, social security, you're going to have to look at your department regs there, because not everybody will use those. But here in California, we get Mexican consulate cards. I would assume some of the border states, you also get those. At least having a date of birth so you can the officers can reference in the DMV if needed, or a vehicle license number. Those can be tricky though, because you can send in a vehicle license number and they could have been driving their friend's vehicle. So vehicle license number probably is the lowest as far as like being able to truly confirm an identity. Driver's license, really, really helpful, and at least a date of birth. And then the other thing you're going to want is any information you can get for them as far as their name, their address, their phone number, spouse info, or backup info. And there's a couple different ways that you can attain this, because I know some people don't want to give it all out. Some people are a little bit resistant to giving you a bunch of information. And this is where checking that internal bias is really important, because if your spidey senses are like, this person's guilty of something, your face, your vibe, your line of questioning, all is probably going to give off that sense to them that you don't trust them and that they're going to become a little bit nervous about giving you all that information. So it's really important that you not allow that stuff to cast a shadow over your information gathering. So you can always say stuff like, our behavior team might want to get a little bit more information about, what happened when you found the dog. I'm not able to get them up here right now. Is there a phone number they can call you at? There's a ton of different kind of little routes. Like if this dog ends up going to foster, our foster team might want some more information about how it was when you found it. Is there a phone number they could reach you out to get in touch with it? That's okay. Like you can say that kind of stuff. You're not going to get in a ton of trouble. We're just trying to get that information, or just someone at our shelter might need follow-up information. If we could get your phone number, it'd be really helpful for us to be able to reach you. And addresses, if they're like really resistant to give you their exact house number, you can really push for like, can I at least get the cross streets so that we know exactly where this dog was lost at? Because you got to try and pinpoint down that information. So still on the who, here's an example of a California driver's license. You also really need to pinpoint on who this person is standing in front of you. Who's bringing in the animal? Is it an owner, a family member, spouse, parent, child, neighbor, another agency? Sometimes we get owner surrenders that come in and they're not in really good shape. And, you might have some concerns and want to talk to the officer, or the officer happens to walk by and is like, hey, I'm concerned about that dog. Identifying at that moment who the person is standing in front of you is really important, because one of the harder things to do, especially in households with multiple adults in them, is identifying who a primary caretaker of an animal was. So if this was like an owner surrender, having paperwork that they check, I am the owner. And if they are like, well, I'm not the owner, then you sitting there and documenting, Alexander Sample is the brother of the owner, Jonathan Sample, and has permission to bring in the dog. And then you call Jonathan and get that approval, whatever your department regulations are. But really important to identify who it is that is standing in front of you bringing in that dog. So this is another case example. This is Nyla. This dog was brought in as a stray. The neighbor took it into an off-site contracted veterinarian. She was reluctant to give very much information. We were able to track her down based on the little bit of information she did give, and we found out that the chip of the dog went back to the next door. We tried to go out and talk to her. She would not talk to us about anything. And so our officer ended up just leaving a card, hoping that she would reach out. And she did eventually reach out and shared with us that she lied because she was scared of the dog owner. So sometimes people are scared about what we as the animal sheltering and animal control agency might do, but sometimes they're scared of the situation that they were in. And, if you have officers, if you are an officer or you have officers that are following up, it is not always the best thing just to drive up to somebody's front door, especially when you have this kind of like nexus of the addresses and stuff. It might be a lot better to make phone calls, text messages, do something that is a little less obvious, because it could be that the finder is actually scared of the person who owns the dog. They know who owns the dog, but they are scared of that person. And this particular person, he was found guilty of animal cruelty because of the condition that Nyla was found in. But he also had some other charges too, which she was, justifiably scared of him over. So photos at intake, when you are bringing in animals, like getting that initial intake photo is good, but we always going to ask for additional photos, anything you think that is really helpful. And we'll look through a couple of examples here soon. But also, if the animal's in your care at the shelter, and let's say your animal control department is an unattached department, it's not part of your shelter, taking pictures as the animal stays with you is really important. So this is Nyla when she was adopted out. This picture was also included in her jury trial. The DA shared this picture of what some basic care and groceries did for Nyla. So as that animal is with you, taking ongoing pictures of the improvement of the animal is also really, really important and can help the case in the long run. So what's being brought in? Is it a live animal, a deceased animal, a sick animal, injured? Is it domestic, a wild? You need to document really clearly what animal is being brought into you, what condition it's in, using your words, using pictures, all of the above, to make sure that it is very clear what animal or what the condition was when the animal was brought in. Your when questions. You really want to find out, when was this animal found? People come in all the time. Hey, I found this dog across, down the street. Okay, did you find it this morning? Did you find it last night? Really try and pinpoint when the animal was found. How long have they had that animal in their possession? This can be really helpful for using Nyla's case, a skinny dog. If that finder had had the dog in her care for 2 weeks, it probably would have weakened the case, because she had 2 weeks to do something and intervene on behalf of the animal, but she didn't. So us knowing exactly when the animal was found and how long the finder had it in their care can be really important. Also, if there's types of injuries, sometimes our veterinarians can help us identify how long ago an injury happened, but we have to know how long the animal had been seen out running loose, or been with the finder, or been in a new location. If they said that they've had it for a little while, but they didn't bring it down immediately, we ask them, what prevented you from coming down sooner? Curiosity, open wonder, not accusatory. So If they said they didn't come down because they wanted to find the owner, hey, what did you do to try and find the owner? All those type of questions can be very, very helpful. And then if you had it for some time, when did you notice this condition or behavior? That way you can identify whether the condition happened while they actually had the animal. You also want to be really specific on your wheres. Where was the animal brought in from? If it was a domestic animal, was it loose in the street? Was it taken off of a property? What were the cross streets? I talked about a little bit earlier. You can also use Parcel Viewer or Google Earth. I'm going to show you a little video that I did. So this is me using Google Earth. What I recommend is just have the person look at your computer screen, add in the address, and it'll zoom in here. And you can just ask them, hey, point to me exactly where you found the dog here on the map. And that way you have an exact location of where it was that they found it, instead of them being like, it was by the second bush on the corner, the northwest corner of 2nd Street. So using a visual can be really, really helpful. And then your whys. Why are you bringing the animal to us? What condition or behavior does it have that's concerning you, especially if it's like an owner surrender? If you're surrendering, why? And then any information on if the animal is sick or injured. All of those can be helpful. Also good to ask them, how'd you catch the dog? This can be very telling for us. If we get an animal in that is, a high FAS scale, high fear and anxiety and stress, and the people are like, oh, I just went and picked it up in the street. That may be something that the ACOs want to dig into a little bit more if needed. How do you know it's sick or injured? Tell us exactly what it is that you're seeing. How do you know it's aggressive? Explain the behavior. Is it forward? Did you see its teeth? Did it lunge? What were you doing at that time? And then how do you know it lives on your street or neighborhood, et cetera, or in your neighborhood? Some additional thoughts. When it comes to charging someone with a crime involves proving beyond a reasonable doubt that they were the person that committed the crime. That's why this line of questioning is so important, because if you end up, intaking the animal in the shelter, and then 3 days go by, and then an ACO gets involved, and then 3 days go by, and then a witness is contacted, it can become really muddy. The waters can become very muddy on who exactly was responsible for the animal ending up in that condition, so on and so forth. We also have to prove that there was some type of involvement. Using surveillance, you're going to see some videos of surveillance from a shelter. CLET certification, that is actually a California specific, but every state should have some type of understanding or rules around who can get what type of information, like wants and warrants, DMV information. So making sure your team has the right certification to access the information that they need. And also getting skip tracing. A lot of people use True People Search. I know every shelter has that one detective on their team, that one person who's like, just give me a minute and can dive right into the interwebs and find all the information that everybody needs. Using skip tracing and lots of public searches, you can also gain a lot of information. So things that can happen in the shelter, photos or videos of the animal, how it's acting or behaving can be vital evidence, because what we want is everything right at the beginning. When an officer is having to start 3 days behind, we lose a big chunk of vital evidence. So photos, videos of how the animal is acting, behaving, what the injuries are, whether or not they're weight bearing, can they support their own weight? If there's a festering wound, if there's maggots, active bleeding, oozing, infection, all of those are really good to be photographed by the intake team, and just put in whatever your system is, wherever the animal file is. Just make sure it doesn't go to where the website shows the lost and adoptable animals, right? You should have some other place where you can keep these photos. If the animal ends up being euthanized, make sure that you do have some type of prior photo and video that might be able to be useful, and then using your CCTV. So this is an example. This is a skinny dog that came in over the counter. And so my question to you, I want you to think about it real quick. What questions would you be asking the finder of this dog? And so obviously we just went through a bunch of them, right? Where'd you find it? Who are you? Do you know who this dog is? So on and so forth. But this one has another key question. We're going to really want to know if they know where her puppies are, right? Because we can look at this dog and see that she most likely has puppies somewhere. And so that's going to be one of our additional questions that we're going to ask to hopefully better understand what's going on with the situation, because we may be in a situation where a field team needs to go out and try and find the puppies, or we may be in a situation where puppies are being weaned too early, because of some type of issue in the household. And we might utilize we're really worried about our puppies. We'd really like to try and figure out, the best way to get her back with her puppies so that the puppies are able to be taken care of, and dig into information using that line of questioning for the person. So capturing evidence. I've talked about photos and videos and things we can do in the shelter setting to grab some evidence. Some other things that you can do really quickly. Let's say there's like a collar that's embedded. Taking that collar off, maybe your vet team's going to do that, and putting it in a brown paper bag, sealing it with tape, putting the animal ID on it, putting your name and the date and what it is. That way, if the ACO shows up, later on, and there is some type of case, they have that evidence available to them, and it has been uncontaminated by sitting around the shelter. Sometimes they accidentally get thrown away. That can be really harmful to a case down the road if that's the pathway we're looking to take. So brown paper bags. Most medical teams are going to have their types of IDEX baggies or their formalin jars. Any of those things, for the most part, can also be used as long as whatever's in there isn't going to contaminate the piece of evidence. So if you have a dog that comes in that's overly matted and has really long nails, you might take nail trimmings and drop them into an empty specimen jar. Tape it up, animal ID, your name, the date, and what it is. And that way that evidence will be available for your officer when they show up. Here is another example of a video that you can take. It is often told to us, especially with skinny dogs, what we sometimes hear is, well, I've been putting food down for her all the time and she just doesn't eat. So another really type of powerful evidence that you can connect and you can collect. You can see that this is not a high quality video. This wasn't taken with a massive DSLR. This was just a quick cell phone video. But once you get approval from the vet team that the dog can eat, taking a quick video of the dog willingly eating can be very helpful. Our officers will sometimes utilize that in the field when we're out talking to somebody. They'll have like a milk bone or something, and the owner will be like, oh yeah, the dog just hasn't been eating. And the officer will be like, oh, can I offer him a bone? Yeah, sure. He probably won't eat it. Offer the bone, the dog eats it. And then that helps us further our discussion. So here are some examples of things you'd want to photograph. Full body, getting a full picture. You see this husky. This is Sugar. You want to get a good full body photograph of exactly what's going on. You may want to get some close up of some of the hair, this top middle one, some severe matting there, and if there's any medical issues. So there should be a full body of this dog, but then also a close up of the mass or tumor. And then in the one on the right, you see a picture of some bruising, some petechiation inside the eyelid there. That was a really good piece of captured evidence for a case where this dog was unfortunately actually strangled. She did great and she was adopted out. But there was very little physical evidence, and the veterinarian who got called in for her intake happened to catch that. So lots of different things you can photograph, but you want to get the whole body kind of all around, and then you want to start zooming in on the areas that might be a problem. So in this picture, there's lots of different things that could be evidence in this picture here. There's two people who are bringing in a crate of puppies, and there's a note on the top that basically says, I know you're good people. Please take care of these puppies for me. I can't do it any longer. So if you were going to intake these animals, my question would be, what would you request to hold on to? After you think about it for a second. So obviously the dogs, they're turning the dogs in, but you're going to want that note, and preferably I would like to keep the crate too. Theoretically, it's not their crate, so I wouldn't think that there would be a major argument, and it might be a mild clue to us if they're like, no, I won't give you the crate, to be like, I thought this was just left on your property. So a better understanding of why they would be unwilling to leave the crate. But the crate would be evidence, the note would be evidence, and then obviously the animals, which were all in good condition. But while you're in that very early stage and unsure if you need to involve an officer about a situation, losing evidence early on can be very difficult for a case moving forward. Time is of the essence. As your spidey senses start going off, definitely talk to a supervisor. There's not really a 48-hour time limit per se, but definitely for our investigations, the longer things go on, the harder it becomes for officers to track down that information. And then this isn't only on intake. If you're doing an RTO, a return to owner, and you've got some concerns, document everything, get any videos you have, and then make sure you put in your follow-up for your ACOs to go out there. So you've documented everything, you've provided the information to the ACO is taking it over. What generally happens now is that the officers are going to do their active investigation. They might do some interviews with the person of interest. They might contact neighbors, recalls if anybody sees the animal at the house, taking any additional supplemental photographs, coordinating with medical for documentation, and they may end up contacting police detectives, depending on how their department is set up. And then they may also contact the DA's office. Once they complete their investigation, if they decide to push forward, they decide there's probable cause for a case to be moved forward, they will prepare that case and give it to the DA. At that point, the DA may contact you as someone who was involved in the early steps on the shelter side. They may ask for a written supplemental. They're going to want all photos. And then there is a potential that as a shelter employee who had an initial contact, you could be asked to go testify. The officer is pretty, we regularly testify when we have our cases. So once it's submitted to the DA's office, the DA reviews it, decides whether or not to file it. Once they decide to file it, it's walked through for a warrant. A judge is going to sign the arrest warrant for the person. The person gets arrested. Then it goes to preliminary hearing. That's when they determine whether or not there truly is enough evidence for the case to move forward. There's going to be a bunch of motions that the defense attorney and the prosecutor are going to make back and forth. They will start discussing a plea deal if preliminary move forward and it was determined that, yes, this case is going. If the plea is accepted, the suspect might be sentenced at that point. If the plea is not accepted, that's when a trial is going to be set. And it could be a jury trial, which is what all of us think about, 12 people, 12 of your peers. But it could also be a bench trial, which is where the judge actually just hears the whole case and makes the determination. And in some animal cruelty cases, we actually have a few bench trials because some of the videos and the evidence that we have in our animal cruelty cases are egregious enough that defense attorneys actually don't want peers. They want the judge to think just about the law and not let the emotional nature make a play in the final decision. The trial is going to allow the prosecution and defense to argue their cases. Then a verdict is rendered. Suspects either released if they're found not guilty, or they are sentenced if they're found guilty, and the case is considered adjudicated. At that point, you will find out whether or not ownership has been revoked or anything like that, or if you have been holding an animal for evidence in your state, if that animal can be released. So I'm going to play a quick video here. So this is a family that came in that were turning the dog as a stray over the counter. You can see it down at the bottom, a German short hair pointer, sweet dog, very, very nice dog. And much like the story I started with, the CSR came to me and was like, this is their dog. It's 100% their dog. The kids are petting it. Like the dog was just standing there. Like, this is their dog. The dog was in perfectly good health. It did not look sick, anything like that. And that particular CSR had a very strong emotional reaction because they believed that they were being lied to. And so their drive was focused more on they're lying about this than I'm worried about this animal's welfare. And, the kids petting the dog was something that really, really frustrated that front desk person. And so, we did look into it. And in this particular case, these were just good people who had done the right thing. And they had found a nice dog on the corner and they drove it down to the shelter so it could hopefully find its owner. And I think it's really important, I shared that other video with the story on the other end of the spectrum, for us to remember that not everybody's lying to us. And a majority of people in our world are good. These are some key things on procedural justice, repairing our relationships with communities and working through cynicism and unconscious bias involves work on our part. And some of that work that we've been looking at in the law enforcement realm is something called procedural justice. And that is where we always allow people to have voice. We give them a chance to tell their side of the story in a non-judgmental fashion. We are neutral in our decision-making. We are clear and show that we are unbiased when we are making our decisions. We're guided by transparent reasoning. Clear SOPs are something that really helps with that everyone is treated with respect. We don't live in a world where someone has to show you respect before you respect them. We should be respecting everybody who comes into our shelter and helping them to the best as we can. And then trustworthiness. Decision makers convey trustworthy motives about those impacted by their decisions. Again, trust is something that is a two-way road, and we have to want to work on earning our community's trust if we want them to trust us. It is a tough world out there right now. And so we have to be mindful of these things. Highly recommend you look into procedural justice and how you can engage and enact that both in field services and in your sheltering. So some community trust building programs, you could do having a beefed up RTO in the field program. Here at my shelter, we do yearly RTO in the field competitions where the officers who do the most field returns win prizes. Community presence and programming. I will say that that type of field program is much more beloved by your community members than citation quotas and competitions. Tabling events, following up when you say you're going to follow up, creating no barrier events for preventative care, having accessible materials, both in tech and language. Not everybody knows how to Google, not everybody speaks English, and we need to have programs and materials that acknowledge and honor that. Creating community partnerships, work with your local vets, pet companies, public health department. In Sacramento, one of the things we did was we started doing joint vaccine clinics where owners could get a COVID, flu, or shingles vaccine, and their pets could get their free vaccines at the same time. One Health, healthy people are able to take better care of their own pets. Using local businesses, small and large. Home Depot is a great place for donation programs. Walmart also has some big donation programs that shelters can take a part of. And then working with your city, county entities and national orgs. And also involving dynamic problem solving for your team. You need to empower the team to make decisions. Creating alternatives to punitive measures to help people not get stuck with misdemeanors if that's the only option you have for, like, let's say an off-leash citation or something. Finding civil or administrative processes and interactive programs that connect with the program. So we're going to talk about these really, really quick. People who are breeding, we want to go out. Most of us have some type of breeding laws. What if we gave out golden tickets for low cost or free spay neuter, and officers just had the ability to give them out to anyone they feel like is a good person to be getting them, like they know they're going to have another litter soon, and it helps bump them up to the top of a snip or a snap or some type of spay neuter portion. Helping with transportation, addressing preventative care for the entire litter. Maybe they're not going to surrender them, but if you can vaccinate those puppies and provide spay neuter, even if they stay with the owner or end up getting rehomed, they're at least going to be altered and vaccinated versus going out unaltered, unvaccinated, and potentially spreading disease or creating more puppies. Pay to spay programs, they were popular, they went away. And even ideas about a puppy buyback program modeled off of gun buybacks. Those gun buyback programs have been very popular in a lot of places, so maybe there's some opportunity there. Underweight animals, we need to be looking at that can't versus won't. Can we do free fecal testing for people, depending on what the laws are in your state? Provide information related to dietary needs, talking and educating about human foods, making sure they understand the appropriate diets. No water, no food, no shelter. Every animal control department has 20 of those calls sitting in their queue probably. You want to identify the barrier, figure out what it is. Is it a can't versus won't? See if you can work on some solutions, provide resources within your ability, leave the information for the owner to review. People can't absorb everything when we're just spitting it out at them. And then look at your codified requirements and assess practicality. Are there any unintended consequences of your codes? And then make sure you create a good follow-up plan. Behavior. Recommend positive reinforcement. Every officer should be carrying some type of positive reinforcement information. Even clickers. You can buy a bag of clickers on Amazon, and officers can teach people really quickly, if they so choose, how to use a clicker and create a positive reinforcement training mindset out in the community. We should also be modeling positive training techniques. Not talking about if a dog's like charging at you trying to bite your arm off, but in general, when we walk up into a house as an officer and someone's dog runs up to us, we should be, if we feel safe in that moment and it's not an aggressive attack, be modeling positive training techniques out to the community. Have bags of training treat that we can hand out, and providing martingales, harnesses, and also looking at training scholarships. Most of us have local programs that we could potentially ask for a training scholarship. So in close, I'm going to leave you with just a couple of thoughts to work through and chew on. There's a delicate balance with providing service while also gathering incriminating evidence. I want you to work with your team members to practice, do role-playing exercises. Always remember to be yourself. If you try and be someone you're not going to feel like you're not going to come across as genuine, and they're not going to be trustworthy. So you can have your spidey senses. We're always going to be respectful. We're always going to treat somebody as a human being and not just assume the worst about them. Access to care struggles are very real. We have to be mindful that about what owners can realistically do. Many people feel they'll be judged or turned away if they tell the truth. When we assume the worst intentions when someone and when someone lies, there are barriers and struggles, stories that have been shared that lead people to behave the way they do. Word is, people know that if they do something wrong, they're going to get in trouble. So we have to help quell some of those fears and help our community understand that our goal is not to go and take everybody's animal away from them. Most pet parents mean well and are doing their best to take care of their animals. Stats from AVMA and I believe Petco and Shelter Animals Count. Studies show that shelter animals account for we handle 4% of the animals in the United States come through our shelter. And we have to be mindful of that. There's millions and millions of well cared for pets and good pet owners out there. Not every situation is going to end up in criminal charges. Don't let that deter you from documenting what you see. Staying in practice is always better than never using your skill. And in our field, you're going to have repeated exposure to potential deceit, and it can drive unconscious bias. Remember that every person you talk to is a different person with a different story, and we can't let what one person did affect how we engage with another person. There's a difference between can't and won't. I've talked about that many, many times. Resource provision is good for the community and for the pet. And for those who feel strongly that we shouldn't be just giving free resources, I heard a story literally just last week about a department that was doing resource provision, trying to help someone. They continued down the path of I won't. And the judge actually said during the case, this department did everything they possibly could do to help you, and you refused to accept their help and to take accountability. And the sentencing and everything that happened was actually stronger because of the work that the team had put in to do resource provision at the front end of that case. And we need to be mindful of gathering information, but not suspicious of everyone. We just have to strike that balance. And that's why practice is so important. We have to believe that people are going to be good in this world because most people are. And this job can be hard, but hopefully with the knowledge you've gained from this training and from future trainings, you'll be able to get out there and continue supporting your community, supporting the animals, keep that idealistic, keep the hope, keep the wonder, keep the curiosity alive, because those are actually the things that help counter bias and cynicism more than anything else. So ask the questions, get the information, but let's be respectful and treat people well too. Thank you very much.